So, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, hello. So, this is the panel about journalism beyond propaganda and spin, and how can truth stand out. And when I was asked to moderate this panel, I thought, oh my God, it's a very simple answer. We have to tell the truth. But the point is, it's getting much deeper. The problems are much deeper. What is truth? You know, this is a philosophical concept, and we are confronted with this now every day. We have the modern concept of truth, fact-based, rational discourse and interpretation of facts. The scientific one, that something is called true as long as it's not proven wrong or false. So this concept is the basis of our work, mainly, as journalists. But what we see emerging within the last 5 years or so is some kind of alternative concept of truth. We saw this in the US when Kelly and Conway spoke about alternative facts. And what we realize more and more, that there are some kind of emotional truth. We're going back to some kind of religious view on truth. Even if we present facts, people don't trust us. There are polls in the US that only 26% or 28% of the people believe or that we are a trustworthy person, that media is trustworthy. So we did something wrong somehow. And we can present facts to them, but they won't believe it. They believe in something else. So we would like to discuss this here with you. We decided that we don't want to talk all the time, so that we would like to integrate you in this discussion. Therefore, I would like to introduce first, now you have to help me if I misspell your name. Eglė Samoškaitė, right? Eglė Samoškaitė. Okay, sorry for that. Eglė Samoškaitė. I tried a lot, but I was still missing this. From DELFI, which is an online media in Lithuania. We have Piia Elonen from Helsingin Sanomat. We have Sanomat from Chosun TV, right? And Edward Lucas from the Economist. So let's start quickly with a question, and let's go from your side over there. How is your work affected at the moment with propaganda? Because this is something in most countries, I know definitely from North and South Korea, there's issues. Brexit we see the Russians interfering in the truth systems in the Baltics and even Finland. So what was the current issue you were discussing and working with?
Well, thanks very much, and also to the organisers for having me. One of the big dilemmas we have is the polarization of viewpoints in America. We sell most of our copies in America, and we've always managed to appeal to a very wide range of readers, from the right through to the left. And it's increasingly difficult because there isn't a sort of we can't agree on what happened yesterday. And if we're reporting about opinions or explanations of what happened yesterday, and there's just no consensus about that, it's very difficult. I also spend a lot of time dealing with the countries of what we used to call Eastern Europe, but I don't call them that anymore. I say the frontline states. And there we see Russian information warfare in a very targeted way coming in through television, through social media, through the Russian mainstream media, and through strange pop-up websites that look like as if they were news sites but aren't. And that's a big part of a big geopolitical event, which is Russia's attempt to establish re-establish its empire in the West. And it bothers me a lot. And we have all sorts of responses to that. We try and bolster good journalism like Eglė at DELFI. We try and explode and rebut the bad journalism. That's quite difficult because those rebuttals and exposés don't often reach the people who are taken in by the fake news. In some countries there's regulatory pressure, so you get pro-Russian channels being booted off air, either temporarily or permanently. In Ukraine, the authorities are trying to ban Russian social media networks. I'm very skeptical. I can see why countries want to do this. I don't think it helps. My basic approach to this is that we're never going to get consensus on whether content is fake or not. There is no clear dividing line between fake news and bad journalism. And you can go to any country and look at the tabloids and you'll get sloppy, politically slanted journalism, sometimes even completely made up stories. And that's just a fact of life. And trying to say this is just honest bad journalism and this is fake news is both empirically very difficult. People find it very, if you print these stories out and format them in a similar way, even very sophisticated media consumers find it hard to tell what's from a fake news site and what's is just bad journalism from a real site. So I'm pretty sceptical about whether we can do very much on that. Instead, I think we have to do two things. One is to push back much harder on the platforms, on the websites and the other ways in which the fake news reaches us, and particularly be very sceptical about anonymity. So if it's an anonymous Twitter account, it shouldn't be treated the same way as an authenticated Twitter account, same for Facebook. And if the website doesn't have phone number, doesn't have street address, doesn't have real people, has concealed its who is information, how it got onto the internet, then we shouldn't treat that nearly as seriously as we do something real. And my final thing, which we can get on more, is I think we have to change, as journalists, we have to change what we do too, but we can get onto that in the discussion.
So, Piia,
yes.
Is there any story, a recent story, which could show the conflict in which we are in right now in Finland?
Yeah, I think in Finland the most emotional thing now is immigration. And this case, this example I'm going to tell, it happened, one of my own journalists, in March. He wrote a story, criminal news, about a sentence which local court gave. Local court sentenced an immigrant for that immigrant has met and had sex several times with 10 years old girl. And local court sentenced that it's not rape, it's abuse, kind of sexual abuse, because that child didn't fight back enough. And our journalists just reported that that was the case. And what happened next happened in internet. It was loads of people, group of them, discussing about this story. And it's pages and pages. I have printed this from internet. It's pages after pages, very graphic and exact ways how this journalist should be killed. Not immigrant, but our journalists. And these people on the internet, they said that this journalist of Helsingin Sanomat, he's pedophile, and that's his opinion, that it wasn't rape, that it was abuse. And you are all, of course, journalists, you know that's not the case. It wasn't his opinion, but he only reported about this case. And not only reported, he actually interviewed many experts who said that that sentence was not right, that it was child, so it has to be rape. So it was a very critical story, but still these people said that this journalist should be killed in this and this and this ways, and he is the pedophile.
But how did you deal with that?
Actually, these people on the internet, they didn't contact us at all. It was just them in the internet discussing about that. But it was other journalists from that area reported us that, have you noticed what's happening, that there's very bad language and real threats. So as we always do, I took this case to our editor-in-chief, and it was this journalist who decided what he wants that we're gonna do, because basically what you have to do, it's legal process, and that's quite heavy if you start that. and then you are more and more in public. So it's quite rough decision to take it that far. And most of the cases we see, journalists, they want to kind of let it go. These people, they are kind of a little bit, they are not normal, so how you can have discussion with them. So the legal punishment is kind of the only way, and that's quite heavy way.
You're working for online media in Lithuania. How is the situation there? What is the conflict there you're confronted with, or what the challenges?
Well, I would say that the situation is not as bad as it is perceived, because the worst period was 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and started a war in Ukraine. Then it was a bad period. We didn't know what we are dealing with. And now we have learned some things. So yes, we have some propaganda news, and how do we deal with that? So I remember like 2 or 3 stories. One of them is about German troops stationed in Lithuania. And a journalist who is working with crime news came to me and said that, you know, we have such a story. There is an investigation started by police that some German group of German soldiers allegedly have surrounded 15-year-old girl from foster home, and that they raped her. So there was a letter sent, an email sent to police, then to parliament, to the speaker of the parliament, and it was written in broken English. So it was the first thing that, you know, we noticed that something wrong with that, and police as well noticed that. Then it was really difficult to believe that German soldiers that are stationed in Lithuania would really form a gang and, you know, rape a girl, because, you know, such an exaggeration, it really looked suspicious. So we started to investigate as it is possible in journalism. Police was doing investigation itself, and we just learned that it was fake news, that that never happened, and that email was sent from outside EU. But I think that it's always, you know, you have to wait a bit to interview much people who are, you know, who are dealing with the situation, and then publish it. And there is no competition in that, actually. We have some, I don't know, we have some unwritten rule. I don't know how it happened. It's not like an agreement between news outlets, but there is such unwritten rule that, first of all, as there are issues about national security, first you learn, first you do fact-checking, and then publish. And there also was another story about chief of battalion of German troops, that he was allegedly photographed in the Red Square in Moscow, and in some war museum also in Moscow, and in an email sent to members of the parliament and members of Committee for National Security. And it was written, you know, for example, that this person has a wife, and that maybe he's loyal to Russia, so could you do something for that? But this email was, there was no author, but it was written that like Labusen, and I will explain. In Soviet Union, people were calling Lithuanians like Labus, because when we say hi, we say Labas. So when it was written that the email was sent from Labusen, so okay, this man or woman thinks like from Soviet Union, so there is something wrong. So that's why we use, I don't know what we use, but it's normal fact-checking and then informing.
But your online media are under high competition because you have to be very quick. How do you deal with that?
we just, in these issues, we are not trying to be first, actually, really. Because
you can afford this,
yeah, we
not
do.
to be first.
I think, sometimes, not always.
Samoškaitė, you come from a region where propaganda has sometimes very absurd faces. I remember one of these propaganda stories I was told when I was in North Korea. They told me that Kim Jong-il, when he was still alive, when he played his first golf tournament, he played 11 holes in one. And things like this, that was really crazy stuff. But this kind of propaganda between North and South Korea, you are quite often, it's very strong, and you're involved in this in a daily business. How do you deal with that?
Actually, the North Korea things, we don't have any, we have information restrictions, so many people just saying that, and so that many people just verify and check the fact. So sometimes Japan, I think Japan and Korea is more strong information that, but actually what nobody knows what happened in the North Korea at this time, so difficult to find the fact, to check, the verifying what happened in North Korea. But you know, at that time, the new president was elected. You know, just 10 days ago, the fake news was burning issue during the danger of fake news, no less serious in Korea at this time. So the fake news is come like the Korea, our company has a victim of like fake news. This kind of fake news this is one of a capture image of the fake news. It is, we broadcast this to anchor and we broadcasting Kim Jong-un at that time, but down there is subtitle is not true, just saying that the North Korea declare war 17th afternoon, 11 o'clock. This is wrong. So all of them knew that the Chosun Ilbo and the TV Chosun is a little bit standing in the conservative side. So this kind of news means that something gonna happen. Like this kind of the fake news effect to the presidential election campaign times. So the fake news came out. Donald Trump spoke against Park's impeachment, telling CNN that he was concerned that the impeachment would affect the global economy. Sounds like most of Korean people think that it sounds like it's true. So the prosecution vowed it crackdown on the fake news involved the election, and the malignant information activists had the election. However, chances are high the fake news will spread quickly because of the limited time to verify such a story. So in our company, like, what is the best way to verify and check the fake news during the presidential campaign season is that we're using the editor, the retirement editors, 4 of them, just checked all the news on the live. They checked something wrong. They just call the anchor. This is something wrong. Then just collect it. So what I want to do is that it's time just to share your idea about how can we handle the fake news and to make correction. At this time, I'm going to keep and talk later.
So at this time, I would like to say that we wanted to invite the editor-in-chief of Russia Today. We also approached WikiLeaks because I thought we should have a vibrant discussion and maybe a more confrontative discussion, but they, as far as I heard, they declined to come here. But we heard all the day about fact-checking. But still, people don't, I think that's what we do and what we have to do, but still we don't, people believe that what we say is not true. As I said before, only 28% of Americans believe the news media anymore, which is very bad. So the question is, what are we doing wrong? If we do our job properly, and if we do the fact-checking, and if we try to do our best, but we are received by the audience as Lügenpresse or as not trustworthy people, not trustworthy media, what are we doing wrong? Edward?
Thank you. The Economist is just about the only paper in Britain, one of the few outside North America anyway, I think, that still has a team of in-house fact-checkers. And so everything we write has been through fact-checkers, and if you habitually make mistakes, it's not good for your career. So I take fact-checking very seriously. It's expensive as well, hiring all those people. I think that the problem, facts are like bricks. You can build a good house or a bad house with the facts. And I think we get too hung up on the idea that you can deal with bad journalism by showing, and fake news, by showing that they got their facts wrong. Maybe the facts are true, but the arguments are wrong and the inferences are wrong. So I'm as I said before, I'm a bit skeptical about going down that road of being able to pull apart something and say this is clearly bad journalism, fake news, and belongs in this category, and this is good journalism and it belongs in this category. It's too much of a spectrum. So I've got some other ideas. One is that I think that truth should be seen more as a process. That's what matters. Are you going about finding the truth and publishing the article in the right way? And there are some quite useful things that we can highlight. One very simple thing is, are you a real person? I mentioned that before, but is this thing that claims to be a news site, does it have real journalists working on it? Do they have names? Can you reach them? Or is it just stuff that comes up anonymously? Does the website itself have a real world identity? Does it have a street address and phone number and so on? That's one thing. Another thing is, does it have any kind of editorial policy, any kind of public explanation about what it does? Again, reputable news organisations tend to have this sort of thing. Not all do, but it's a good thing. Is that there? Is that something you can look at? Perhaps most important of all is how you deal with mistakes. Because I know, having been a journalist for more than 30 years, we make mistakes all the time. It's just part of life as a journalist. You make mistakes. The question is, how do you deal with them? Reputable news organisations make a big deal out of mistakes. The American ones are excellent here, but many other countries are good too. And we publish apologies. We publish corrections. We publish sometimes just a clarification. When we said X, we didn't mean Y. Sorry if anybody got it the wrong way. We may have letters to the editor. We may have, in Germany, you have this thing called the Gegendarstellung, where someone has the legal right to put a different point of view in some circumstances. And to me, that's all the sign of a healthy editorial culture. It's something that fake news doesn't do. If you look at I'm glad you didn't invite the RT editor, because I think I couldn't have been on the same platform as her. But if you look at the RT website, there's only one time they've published a correction or apology. And it's clear that they did that because they're being sued. I'll leave it to you to search site.rt.com, apology, nothing comes up. I think you have to put apologizes, spelt the American way with a Z. You get this one article. Anyway, that's your homework for today, the one time they apologized. So that's a sign of a healthy editorial culture. I think we have to engage more with the stories that our critics are worried about. And one of the big problems, which I notice after 30-something years, is that journalism has become an elite profession with elite preoccupations. When I first started in the Oxford Mail newsroom in 1984, people laughed at me because I'd been to university. We now, I think, at The Economist have one journalist who hasn't been to university. Most people have been twice or three times, master's degrees, doctorates, and so on. So historically, journalism was never an elite profession. It was something you went into sometimes at the age of 16, sometimes at 18. It was quite rare for people to come in. And that has turned us into something different, I think. It means that we are not like most of our readers. Maybe The Economist is an exception here. The Economist journalists are very much like Economist readers. But if you work in the mass media, most of the journalists are quite unlike the people they're broadcasting to or writing for. And I think that's a problem. That's one of the reasons why people don't believe the media the way they used to. So I think we need to take a hard look at ourselves. We're very good at thinking about diversity in terms of gender and ethnicity and so on. We are hopeless when it comes to looking at diversity in terms of social class. I could say a lot more on this, but I will talk about it some other time.
Yes, I'm a little bit pessimistic as well with this, if the facts are enough, because we have made so many stories, not just news, but very basic kind of myth busters things, fact-checking things that here's claim, what is said, what is true, and it doesn't help because these people who doesn't want to believe, they don't even read established media. We don't reach them at all. So facts are not enough. So I have example. Even my own mother, she had opinions about immigration and how there was a retirement home, old people's home, emptied, that they could get immigrants inside it. And I Googled everything. I gave her facts that it's not true, that didn't happen. And she said how expensive this is. And I took state budget and I covered every fact. And after 2 hours, my mother said, okay, you have all the facts. My facts were wrong, but I still have this opinion. And that's it. So I kind of lost it even with my own mother. So it's not easy to get those facts true. So I think one thing we could do more is kind of reach these people before we lose them. So we could go more, for example, to schools. In Finland we have this, we have a thing called Newspaper Week. Newspapers send big piles newspapers to schools, shared with all the pupils, and journalists visit schools. But I think we don't do that as much as we used to do. And Helsingin Sanomat used to have dedicated journalists just for the schools and the pupils, and we don't have that anymore. So maybe we could go more to schools, and not only, I think that's a mistake, only to promote your own media, that we are doing this and we are that good and we have stories like that. You should more like do things with students, like research fake media sites and rumors and false news, and give opportunity to students to find what is true and what is not. And maybe that kind of media education could be one thing that media houses could do.
So is it more of a cultural process, maybe of changing Weltgeist, world spirit, that what we thought was sure for a long time, that fact-based information is the thing of modern society and which brings us forward, or do the truth systems change? Now the truth is becoming more, we talked about this before, more religiously motivated. So you believe in something, you don't check. What do you experience in Lithuania? Is this a kind of discussion that you see that the truth comes under threat from a new cultural concept of lies?
But I don't think it's new. I think maybe, yeah, we see that trend, but it's not new. Remember Middle Ages, just people believed that there were witches. So, I mean, yes, but that's psychologically based, that we are looking for facts that acknowledges our opinion. That's normal and that's really not new. And yes, people do not always believe in media, and we not always do what is expected to do. For example, not always we write clarifications, as Edward said, not always we apologize, and that's wrong side of the media in Lithuania. But what I think that I really liked one colleague from United States yesterday. She said that when you are in a hurricane, you make a great structure and keep going. So really, we are in some hurricane. People are looking for facts that they believe in. But still, if you have a platform, you are doing your job, you are checking information, you are apologizing if something went wrong, you did some wrong thing, and in 5 years you will build trust, I think. But yeah, in Lithuania we have some groups of people who are just believing, I don't know, in some different stories. For example, we had very mass hysteria that there was a family in Norway, a mother living there, and she had some problems with her child. So she decided to ask her relatives to take a child to Lithuania while the child was taken from her for some period of time. So, and it was mass hysteria in Lithuania that we should do something with Norway. It's a very bad state, and but you always do this fact-checking using your brain, writing articles, and not discussing with that kind of hysteria, because it's impossible.
What I realized in the US is that on Twitter or Instagram and so on, there's more and more citizen journalists, and people believe them more than they trust us. There is a journalist going after Donald Trump. They try to do a deep inside research. They try to dig out the facts. They try to connect the dots. They have millions and millions of followers, very dedicated followers, who trust them, this single person doing this, some kind of citizen online journalism, but they don't trust us anymore. Is there any kind of development in Asia as well in this direction?
Yeah, we have pretty much the same situation, that we have problems that we are the readers and audience, viewers, have the problems that maybe the people try to find only the news they want to hear and see. This behavior may be the reason that make more fake news. We call this a filter bubble. So in Korea, the internet service is quite strong in the world. So pretty much same as she did. My mom is around 70 ages. They have their own group, the sharing of information and internet, and they want to support conservative parties. Then they share the information and in sending to me. This is a real story, but I know the fact, and I don't want to fight with my mom. So, but she always told me that this is a real fact, but it's not. So that means that she want that is a true. So she want to spread out, and they support their leaders. So it is quite a tough situation. So, and on other stories that the fake news developed splendor, we just captured it. The police was captured that, and then just actually he was a novelist. So at the time we just asked why did you write this news? Then he said his excuse has been famous in Korea for a while. I have no obligation to know the facts. I'm not a reporter. I'm not a news director of the broadcasting company. So that means that he just want to write what he want and then spread out. And not everybody, just certain people in the group within the internet. So that is so powerful political activities in Korea right now, and that was so tough to crack down at this moment, I think.
So now I would like to
Can I add something?
Of course.
I think the problem is that in Lithuania there was a period of time when we were reporting in a very strange way. For example, there is some process, some fact, whatever, and we report one opinion, another opinion, and where is truth? And for example, imagine I'm just a user, media user, and I don't have so much time to decide where is truth, and I read the article, and okay, there are different opinions, and where is truth? And I think that, well, journalists should check and give the real facts and truth for the readers, because as a user of media, I cannot afford just spend a week, to know what's happening.
Yeah, a lot of things might have to do with changing technology, fastly developing. So I would like to get your input now, because what we found out during the whole Congress is that even while we do our fact checking, it's getting more difficult day by day to get the trust of the audiences. So the trust is declining. So the question is, do we need new discussions in a different way? Do we need maybe even legal changes in the legal system or new laws, whatever? So I would be happy if you would give us some input here on the stage. Okay?
No, I want to hand it over.
Whoever. Like over there.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about social media and the fact-checking. Indeed, we cannot, in my understanding, fight with the social media. For instance, the blogger being, for instance, an eyewitness of some case, posting pictures, and we do have to verify the origin of these pictures. And we all know that, for instance, using a Facebook Messenger as a communication, it just deprives the original files with the metadata for them. So as Mr. Lucas has mentioned, it was quite wise that we do need to educate those people. And for the fact-checking and for the mission of the fact-checking, which we are obliged to do, we do have to kind of educate them to an understanding, to the level of understanding of the culture of spreading the information for our need, for our media. Because they have to understand as much as possible that spreading those files and spreading those data would demand a verification, and if they want to be heard, if they want to be published by the bigger media, they have to provide the information that is possible to check. So this is about education, and this is about building platforms where we can use civic journalism as a real journalism without getting into a debris of the weird bloggers who just post the crap. That's it, I suppose. Thank you.
There were a few more questions.
Yeah. Johannes, you mentioned about individual journalists having more traction than mainstream media. And I wonder whether we have not addressed one issue, which is sections of the mainstream media also have an agenda and sometimes are guilty of selective evidence. So as Disraeli said, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Same thing with facts. So you can present anything with a certain amount of facts. And I'll give you a small example, and the question is addressed to Edward, actually. We have left-leaning media and right-leaning media, mainstream media I'm talking about. And the Scandinavian model, I live in Norway, and the Scandinavian model was now described as the best model to follow. And I saw in the mainstream right-leaning media, the description of the Scandinavian model was all about how it is market-friendly policies. It never mentioned anything about the high taxes and the social welfare. So there is something to be said about losing credibility if a holistic picture is not given, this problem of selective evidence.
Thank you. Leif Lundsmann, Denmark, Scandinavia, by the way. I like even a young colleague like you saying that this is not a new phenomenon. I've been taking part in these journalistic discussions for 3 or 4 decades. This is not a new headline at all, and the problem is not new either. But I would like to address Edward Lucas. I admire your magazine. But isn't it a sign of a crisis or a meltdown of a journalistic profession that even serious journalistic magazines like your own need internal fact-checking after the journalists deliver their stories? Isn't fact-checking actually the very core tool for journalists? And this leads me to the advocacy of a better education or a better status for journalism, better tools for journalism. You say that journalists make mistakes. That's part of the profession. No wonder that people don't believe us then. What would journalists say? What would we journalists, I'm a journalist myself, regrettably, what would we journalists say to a similar statement from doctors or lawyers say? Well, doctors do mistakes, that's part of the profession, or lawyers do mistakes, that's part of the profession. Wouldn't we demand responsibility taken and punishment given? Wouldn't we demand educational reforms of the lawyers and the doctors? And wouldn't we, and this is very controversial within journalistic environments, wouldn't we demand that a kind of a certification that has to be taken into fact-finding and other journalistic tools before giving professional people in professional certificated media the pen? And shouldn't there be a system for punishing those who do the mistakes and do not do the fact-checking correctly, so they will lose their certificates? Couldn't we dream of a future where there would be certificated journalism and uncertificated journalism, just like with lawyers, doctors, and other professions? But do we dare? Usually journalists do not like the idea of certification and of professional bodies outside their own judging their professionalism.
We discussed it in a second, but Ken has a question.
Ken Choi from Chosun newspaper, Korea, where Mr. Lee is coming from. Actually, just to elaborate a little bit, I've been a journalist for the past quarter century, long enough for me, and I agree, couldn't agree more with Mr. Lucas on, journalism is an elite profession. And yet, because the times changed, everybody's a journalist, Facebook journalist, everybody, because of the technology we have, and anybody can publish whatever they want online and it becomes a news. And my colleague here mentioned about it. The colleague back there also talked about educating journalists. But I think this is a systemic issue. It's because our living condition changed. So the concept of being a journalist is changing. And to tell you the truth, we the past journalists don't know what to or how to deal with this situation. We talked about education. Who's going to pay for it? Certification. Who's going to, as Mr. Stenchik said, who's going to regulate that industry? Do we want any regulation? How do we want to do this? And I think we journalists, and especially in IPI, we need to talk about this systemic change. Things are changing, and fact-checking and fake news has always been there. And fact-checking is a basic concept of our, when we start our journalism thing, that's the number one thing we start with. We teach our young journalists to fact-check, make sure we write the right thing. But, correct thing, not the right thing. And but we're not talking about the systemic change. So I just want to throw you this out. How are we going to deal with this systemic change issues? Say, Senshik, do you want to talk more?
Thank you. So I saw 3 points in here. So the first question is, does journalism, the profession, our profession has to go beyond what we do on a daily basis, writing for newspapers, doing TV pieces and so on? Do we have to go to schools? Do we have to be part of an educational approach of how to deal with media? Should we do this? Should this be all our media outlets? Should they have some kind of department dealing with this? Should we go to the people? Should we have some kind? We talked about this before about having town halls with the audience, so they have a direct contact with us. Then there was the question of certification. Can one certificate a journalist? Who can do this? Should we do this? And you said about selective evidence and agenda. I think this is 3 points which we should address, but let's first ask about certification, because this is something in the room which could be quite controversial.
I'm reminded of when Joseph Brodsky was on trial in the then Soviet Leningrad and was asked, who gave you the authority to be a poet? And I'm strongly against certification. I think it's, particularly now with the so many micro news outlets, I think it's both unworkable and also has a very bad history. And it was a big fight in UNESCO in those of you who remember the 1970s and the New World Information Order, the idea that we should license journalists, and IPI fought very hard against that and was right to do so. But I want to push back a bit on your point about fact-checking. We've had fact-checkers in The Economist for decades, and this isn't a new thing. And it's really important because journalists are working in a bit of a hurry, because news happens, and you need that second pair of eyes. And they say, yes, you're reporting, you're quite right, it was in Hamburg, but you said the conference ended this week, it actually runs another week. There's also the big mistakes where you say Iran and you should say Iraq, and that's pretty serious, and if you do that repeatedly, you will lose your job. There's also the sort of small mistakes which you just get from having someone go back to the source material, reading it again, and saying, hang on a moment, you've interpreted it this way, you sure it couldn't actually be that way. Particularly we get this with statistics. It's very important when one's interpreting statistics to have a second pair of eyes and run the regression analysis again and just be absolutely sure, because it's a service to the readers. On the question of selective evidence, I completely agree with you. This is a very important point. And when I'm training journalists, one of the points I make is that obviously The Economist can be quite opinionated, but put your opinion either at the very beginning or the very end, and make sure that you present the facts in a way that even someone who disagrees with you would agree that you've presented all the relevant facts. That's the big test. So put in everything that is, even if you want to make the argument one way, put in everything that is inconvenient for your argument that your opponents would like, and that way you get credibility. And finally, you said doctors. I mean, my sister's a doctor. Doctors make mistakes all the time. They're working with incomplete information, under pressure, things go wrong. If there is real carelessness and negligence, then people sue them and they lose their jobs. But I think lawyers make mistakes, doctors make mistakes, politicians make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. The question is, do you have the procedures and the practices in place to cope with the mistakes? Does someone else look at it? Do you build the bridge with the wrong calculation so it falls down, or do you have someone look at it again? I think it's absurd to argue that everything has to be done to the standard of a mathematical proof, because even mathematicians make mistakes.
That idea of punishing those who make mistake, it is great. I loved it. I just started to plan all those punishments, and one would be cleaning the kitchen next to the media desks and naming a paper and so on. But seriously speaking, I think that's not really solving the problem that we have, because I think the problem is polarization, that we have those people who are happy with their media and they want the facts and they think that media, established media, is the one who gives the right facts and real facts. And I think that's most of the people. But then we have those people who doesn't trust established media. They even hate it. And they don't want to read it, and they really don't give a shit about certificates. So that doesn't really kind of help that problem, I think.
Education in schools. What do you think about this idea?
I think what we need is education how to use media, because it's really difficult for normal user to know who owns that media, why does it publish certain articles, and that's really a problem. For example, we do have some channels in Lithuania who are owned by some strong businesses, Lithuanian businesses, and that's a problem. When you see the news, when you are a journalist, you know all these things. But if you are just ordinary user, it's really difficult to understand why they are presenting news in that way as they are. So yes, we would need education how to use all these things, but I'm not sure that people are ready to learn that, because we are in a hurry in all areas. Pupils are not interested, in all these small things. I don't know. Just it's a good idea, but I'm not sure if it's effective. And as to licensing journalists, I wonder what would happen in some authoritarian states. I don't know who would license, and there are two values, like independence and then licensing. I don't know which will we choose.
Selective agenda setting.
10 years ago, I thought that the journalists have a license was correct, but at this time, it's kind of make them hesitate to a right to say and the right to do. So the journalism, do a journalism, just write down phrase by phrase, just think about do a journalism, and let them to the market, the audience, and then just figure out that particular the writer or reporter, they did it wrong or not, just market, just understand that. And also, the punishment thing is that I believe that freedom of the speech is more than a punishment, I believe. So it's not a good idea, though. And also, I just worry about UNESCO point out that the protection of the media sources become increasing difficult. So because of the national security and terrorism, they're using a technology law from each country, increasingly monitoring the press and email. So some more punishment, and then also the make hard to write down something, that means that this kind of the government's controlled, and all kind of things.
So the other point, which about is this a new problem, is really important. I think that ever since we started having technology, we've always lagged a bit behind the technology. We change our social norms and we change our legislation as technology develops. But this has been a real technological leap. We've got anonymity of a kind we never had before. We've got ubiquity of a kind we didn't really have before. In the past, if you wanted to spread something all over the world, you needed a shortwave radio transmitter. Now you just can do it on an iPhone. Other mobile phones are also available. We've got ubiquity, so we've got immediacy as well. It happens absolutely instantly. So we shouldn't be surprised that we're taking a bit of time to catch up, but at the same time we should be very open-minded about the changes that we need to do. And the other point on media literacy and so on, I think it's really good. We need to get out of our ivory tower a bit, and I don't think it's practical for us all to go and do town hall meetings because we just don't have the time. But at The Economist, we've started doing Ask Me Anythings on Reddit, AMA, and we also do hour-long sessions on Facebook where all Facebook users can pose questions. And this is basically a good thing. The problem with it is that we get swamped by trolls, and particularly our female journalists have had to put up with an incredible amount of abuse on Facebook. I mean, it's quite extraordinary the things people write. We need ways, so we sort of filter that out. And I think we need a way of doing these discussions where we, as I said earlier, we privilege the people who are real rather than giving in to what I think the ancient Greeks would have called ochlocracy, mob, the rule of the mob rule.
So, any more comments? We have a few minutes left.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Blanca Tape. I work for the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. The European Union, one thing that maybe you're aware of, the European External Action Service started a group called Disinformation, EU versus Disinformation. And one of the things here that I think should be mentioned is that there is an information warfare going on right now, and I haven't heard really much about Russia, in particular in your countries, in Lithuania, in Finland as well, of course. And it has two purposes, this is information. One is to persuade of false things to the population, and the other one is to persuade that nothing is true. And there is where it goes into the media, into you guys. So they are attacking you directly for one purpose in particular, which is to create a discredit of the European Union and the things they do. I mean, they spread information such as Italian nuns become pregnant after hosting migrants. This comes from the Russia Today, Sputnik. Europe's migrant crisis is secretly orchestrated by Soros, also coming out there. A lie said 1,000 times at the end becomes the truth, and we all know that when we study journalism. So my question to you is like, what do you think? I mean, of course, I think fact-checking and coming up and saying and denouncing that this is happening and pointing out to the people that this is true, that this is false and this is true, I find that very crucial and very important, because otherwise you don't know where you're heading towards to, and you don't know really what to believe in. But my point here is in particular in the Baltic countries, in Germany now, because of the German elections, what we have seen, all the things that Russia Today has been talking about, Macron, for example, and now they will come up with Merkel, of course, like the devil of all devils. The media here, when you have this information warfare going on, when you're being targeted for the purpose of manipulating and discrediting, what do you think the European Union itself, its institutions, could do here without getting involved into freedom of the media, into freedom of speech that, of course, it should be protected? Thank you.
Okay, we have to make it very quick now. I think it's a very interesting statement. So, are we at the information war, and what role do we play if there is a war? What is our role in this war? Should we counterattack? Should we point out who is spreading the fake news? Should we hold them accountable in our daily news and in our TV shows and in our newspapers? Should we do so? Should we become part of this war?
I really liked some initiative in Ukraine during the Russian-Ukrainian war. That was Stop Fake, I think. And they were really effective. They were taking all this news and just, announcing in Facebook everywhere, we have done fact-checking, and this is false, these are arguments why this is false. And actually, it really worked. And I think what we need in Baltics, it's some kind of initiative here that we could work on these issues. And this means not only journalists, but also IT specialists, whatever. I mean, we need some gathering of people of several competences and doing this job. But also I think that state must add some efforts as well as journalists.
So one second, Donald Trump said we are the enemy of the people. Donald Trump said, or Steve Bannon said, that we are the opposition party. If we counter it, if we become part, do we prove them right?
Well, I think you're right. It's a great question. We are being attacked. There is an adversary there. We can't, and I think the first thing is to accept that this is an attack which in part uses information. It uses lots of other things as well. I think that we shouldn't respond in kind. I'm all in favour of doing satire to unsettle Mr. Putin, but I wouldn't want to put fake news into the Russian information space. That would bring us down to their level. There is actually a really good NATO centre now, the NATO Centre of Excellence in Riga, is working on exactly this. It's dealing with things like the use of humour, the use of social media by troll networks. They're trying to work out how these tens of thousands, sometimes millions of fake social media accounts are all linked together and what they're doing. So there's real hard analytical work going on that. And we can maybe get inside those networks and start disrupting them and doing stuff. It doesn't necessarily affect the people they're reaching. And I think perhaps the most important thing on this is to actually measure the impact. You came out with some great stories. But we know more about toothpaste than we do about information. We should be doing detailed market research on where Russian disinformation is having an effect. Who consumes it? Why do they consume it? In what quantity do they consume it? Does it reinforce their existing beliefs or give them new ones? And once we see which demographic groups are being affected by this and where, which countries and so on, then we can start tailoring our response. But I'm a bit worried that we are sort of assuming that everybody believes this stuff and it's happening everywhere. And I think the problem may in some respects be smaller than we think.
So I'm very sorry that we have to leave it here. The time is out. We are running out of time. And thank you very much, all of you. It was a very interesting panel. And I think these are the questions we will discuss hopefully every day because our profession is changing and we have to adjust. Thank you very much.